Hi, everybody. This is David P. France, and I'm coming to you from Switzerland. This is our 11th interview, and I would like to thank everybody thus far who's people who have been watching, giving us feedback. We really appreciate your support. Today, I'm speaking with Kenny Fikes. Kenny, you say it's really Kenny, but it's Kenneth.
My name is Kenneth Fikes, but Kenny picked up somewhere along the way.
Right. Kenny Fikes and I, we go a long way back. He and I attended the University of Pennsylvania together in the 80s, it was mid-80s. And one of the things I like to do is I like to have people on who I went to school with, whether it be college, law school, or business school. And a lot of times when we get together and we're not filming, we're just talking, we end up talking about a lot of the things that happened back then, because there were a lot of things. And we also end up talking about what's happening now. So Kenny is living in Tennessee. This is correct, right?
Yes, Knoxville, Tennessee.
Knoxville, Tennessee. Originally from Massachusetts.
No, I'm originally from Chapel Hill, North Carolina. I went to high school in Massachusetts.
You went to high school in Massachusetts, right? At one of the private schools up there, right?
Right.
Okay. So Kenny and I, we talked a little bit beforehand, and when I last saw you, it was at the Alpha Phi Alpha Psi Chapter 100th anniversary, Psi Chapter at the University of Pennsylvania. We had a 100th anniversary of the chapter, the founding of the chapter. You were there. Could you tell the audience, why you were there and what you saw at this event?
Well, I was there because I've been working. You have a frat brother, so clearly, well, not clearly to everyone else. You and I know I'm not in Alpha.
That's right.
Didn't have any problem being at the event because, of course, having been at the University of Pennsylvania during the same time that a lot of your fraternity brothers were there, particularly certain guys in my own class of 90, like Brian Keys and Scott King and Kevin Rayford, we were good buddies. In fact, Kevin and I were freshman year roommates and have stayed in touch over the years. I've visited him in Las Vegas and everything. In fact, got a text from Scott just yesterday saying, "Hey, buddy, hope everything's all right." And talked to BK probably 3 days ago. So these guys are pals. But the reason I was there is I've been working on a project with John Kingston, who is one of your fraternity brothers, and he'd asked me to let him know whenever I heard of anything where people might be getting together surrounded around the Penn experience, because he thought that might be a good way for us to help sort of promote the project that he was working on. So I let him know about this one. And about 2 days before the event, he calls me and says, "Hey, you want to go?" And I said, "Well, yeah, sure. My schedule's flexible." So anyone, of course I wanted to go because I told you, I'm friends with a lot of your frat brothers, but
right.
Anyone who spends a lot of time with me and understands my schedule knows that it's relatively flexible. So I really never have an excuse because I can pretty much get away. So I said yes, and we were there.
Yeah. And for me, I'll tell you what it meant for me, besides seeing all the, frat brothers. I mean, outside the context of frat, what was important to me was to see all of those, all of us as Black men in one room. I think that, to me, was a big deal. I had not seen anything like that in a long time.
You don't see that in Switzerland, huh?
I mean, I'm here in Switzerland, right? So and I made sure that I was on a plane. I spent whatever money I had to spend in order to be there because I knew what the outcome was going to be.
Yeah.
And if I had not been there, I would not have been able to do this interview series. That's
Sure.
how critical it was, because I knew things were changing, and specifically for our peers, our group, our generation, if you will, I knew that it was going to be it was a turning point or a crossroads. So I think one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on here is to talk about that crossroads. Specifically, we can talk about for generation, but we can also talk about for Black people in general or Black men. But give the audience a little bit more about your background growing up before we move into that area.
Well, so I'll do my best, because certainly, we all are just in a modicum of tremendous experiences, and we could talk for an hour, right, about ourselves.
Right.
But I think I'll start by simply saying three things. One, I've never really fit in anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Two, having said that, I have, however, always felt comfortable in my skin for the most part. We have our ups and downs. I just didn't fit any one group. And three, while I'm mostly serious about the path of life, I've never really taken myself too seriously, whether it was what I chose for a major in school or how much time you take off work and worrying about consequences, or maybe going a little far on an investment. I've always had this natural optimistic outlook that it'll work out, and if it doesn't, I can fix it. Don't know where that comes from. It's just natural.
Mm-hmm.
So having said that, well, I do know where some of it comes from, probably my mom. So I grew up Chapel Hill, North Carolina, kid of a single mom, no brothers and sisters. So pretty much just she and I in the world. And when I say in the world, in terms of that nuclear family of two people, my mother and one other sibling had one child. Everyone else had multiple. So I had multiple cousins, but I grew up alone. That probably shaped my outlook on the world and how I rolled, if you will, because I've always been pretty much a gregarious loner. And I just came up with that term, like I know a bunch of people know who I am, but I've never really rolled deep in the car, kind of like me and the boys are going here. I may meet them there because I always want that option. But I've always been sort of a gregarious loner and very comfortable alone, which is one of the reasons I have such a love for music, I think. Growing up when we had the little tape recorders that you press and you flip out the cassettes.
Right.
I used to record, The Quiet Storm on the radio and all that kind of stuff. And, you have your little cassette tapes and you tape them together when they break. So, just being alone a lot. Did well academically growing up. I don't know if I want to go so far as to say teachers' pets, but all my teachers loved me. Got along with people, had a natural inclination for physicality, athletics. In the Black community, there's playing the dozens. So people will always find whatever it is. Is
Right.
it your shoes? Is it your glasses? Is it that funny looking shirt that your mama bought you that people are going to bust on at school? Oddly enough, for me, it was my body. Because for some reason, I say for some reason, stupid, just genetically, I was, even at a young age, like 9 years old, I had muscles. I didn't lift weights.
Right.
And so my buddies used to say, dude, what is wrong with you? Just strong for no reason. What, you freak or something? And so that was a thing that people busted on me about, because, that was it. But,
right.
Little kids can make that funny, right?
Right.
Academically, as a kid, I did pretty well. My mom was strict but not overbearing because the bluff was in real early. So it didn't matter when I got taller or whatever, because here's one of the things I'll tell you, and I don't say it because I'm proud of it, I am, but it's just the truth. It may seem well, maybe to you, your background is not that unrealistic, but when you look at the world today, I can tell you that, at least to my recollection, because I don't think it ever happened, from the time that I can ever remember interacting with my mother to the day she passed, I never raised my voice at my mom. That whole little attitude thing and talking that people do never happened. You better believe I felt like it, but it never happened, because that's the way, we were raised back then. And so not only did you get that at home, but the teachers had the right to it, right? It's sort of like, tell me if he does something and I'm gonna get him again, and you better get him before he comes home, right? That sort of thing. Couldn't go anywhere. A lot of the kids could hang out. Chapel Hill, North Carolina is is a college town. And so by the time you hit junior high, which for us, high school started in 10th, junior high was 7th, 8th, and 9th.
Mm.
And so by the time we got to junior high, sort of like kids in the 90s maybe, or early 2000s would walk the malls. The kids of my age in Chapel Hill walked Franklin Street.
Right.
I couldn't go anywhere. And that's another thing. So those are the two things that my buddies picked on me about, like, you can't go anywhere. Like, homebody's stuck in the house. And she would make me read even before I could go to like a skating party or wherever. And sometimes I would even skip ahead in the book, right? So I knew that if I just put the book down and left, I knew she'd come in my room and like check where the bookmark was. Yes. So if I didn't feel like reading, I'd like skip ahead 2 chapters, like I really did read, and then leave. So the expectations. Last thing I'll say about that, so I don't just ramble, is I'm really grateful for having the mother I had, because she did. There's some levity in this, but there's some truth in it. Although she tore my behind up when I needed, I was never really a bad kid. The stuff we got whippings for, we call them whoopings, you probably wouldn't even get a spanking for today. We got spankings for stuff like not moving too fast. Like I told you to do something, right, and 15 minutes later and you didn't do it. Uh-huh. You hadn't done it yet. So, but anyway, probably before I turned 10 years old, David, I really believed that I was very smart and handsome. Why is that? And that I could conquer the world, because even though she did not spare the rod, she was not one of those easygoing, that's my little boy, and, spoil, like the shut up was in early, I'll pop you in the mouth. But at the same time, she was constantly like hugging on me and telling me that I'm wonderful and I'm smart and I'm handsome. So, I mean, if you hear that enough,
yeah, of course.
Internalize it.
Yes. Well, I mean, I remember when I don't remember specifically when you arrived at Penn, because I was a year before you. But I mean, explain to the people what it was like to attend Penn during that era. So I came in, I started in 1985 and graduated in 1989, and you came in 86, right?
You graduated in 90, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So to explain Penn, I'll have to explain high school a little bit. So I told you about middle school in North Carolina.
Right.
Middle school was 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, which means that in the 9th grade, you're at the top of the class. You're the big dog, and then you start over in 10th as the little guy in high school. So I was always the youngest, one of the youngest in my class. And so that summer, say before 7th grade, July 29th, I turned 12. A lot of the other kids were turning 12 in that fall, right? Mm-hmm. You're only in school for a month or 2 or 3 and they're 12. So I was almost a year behind them in age. So 12, 13, 14 was middle school at home. The conversation had begun that I would go away to boarding school. And I was like, I want to finish my 9th grade year. I want to be the big dog, sports and all that stuff. And so the compromise was I got to finish in 9th grade, but we wanted the experience of the whole 4 years of boarding school. So I finished 9th grade at home, and then I started 9th grade in Massachusetts.
Oh, wow.
So my real class is your class.
Oh, right.
So I would have naturally graduated high school at 17 in 1985, but instead, because I did the 2 9th grades, I graduated high school in 1986 in Massachusetts.
Right.
That experience was pretty amazing. It was the best of both worlds. When you talk about growing up with people, you live together, you eat together, you sleep together, you do jobs together, you play sports together. And your parents are in different places all over the world and all over the United States. My freshman year roommate, and I know you asked about Penn, but I find this fascinating.
Right.
At my age, I'm 52 today, when I grew up in the South, there wasn't all this other in terms of ethnicities. There were pretty much white folks and black folks.
Yep.
And if there were other, they were just not saying it.
That's right.
For example, I remember the one Asian kid in my class. When I say class, like the whole 5th grade or the whole 6th grade, his name was Chris Mumford. I remember the one kid that we knew was Jewish, and I say knew today, now there's probably more. His name was Stephen Klein, and he wore the yarmulke. Otherwise, it was black people and white people.
Right.
There were Mexicans, nothing. My freshman year at at Northfield Mount Hermon, on my floor, me, the brother from North Carolina, Ik Sung Yoon from Incheon, Korea, and Rogelio Galindo from Mexico City, Mehrdad Verzanda from Tehran, whose family had been one of the big families but kicked out with the whole change in the regime from the Shah to
I remember.
And Sharif Anis, who was from Egypt, maybe Cairo, but from Egypt. And then the guy who became my best friend, Brian Callen, who's currently an actor in LA, he's been in Hangover, different stuff, but just a wonderful guy. White guy, but different because he'd grown up as a minority all over the world because his dad was an executive with Citibank.
Right.
And so he didn't have the same outlook as like a white guy from the US. And then people from all over the US and other places in the world. But that sort of, you talk about diversity. We're not talking about diversity just because faces are different. I mean, like, people were different. Like Mehrdad was, and then I'll get off this, but I think this is funny. So he's this guy from Tehran, Iran, and he started hanging out with me and then another guy, Shannon Worthy, who's a black guy from Atlanta. And so he's this guy with this Persian accent speaking in black culture. So he would say things like, "Man, what the hell are you talking about, boy?" Right? Because we were influencing that.
Right, sure.
Yeah, and so I grew up in Chapel Hill, where the population was probably about 15% black, and then I go to this boarding school where the population of black folks is like, you know, is point something. And so even though I grew up with a mother who was down for the cause, you know, that lady, she would tell me stuff, and I was like, Mom, it's not 1965 anymore. She's like, boy, I'm telling you, right? You were fucking down, kind of thing, right?
Sure.
And so when I got to Penn, I'd had, except within my family, primarily an experience with predominantly white people.
Right.
And so when I got to Penn, I was like, oh my God, are you kidding me, right? Not only are there black people everywhere, because this is Philly, but they're not black people that are attempting, and when I say attempting, if you grow up in a place, that's just who you are, right?
Right.
None of this ignorance about trying to be white or culture. That's just, if that's how you grow up, that's how you grow up.
Right.
Not only were they not those guys who, my exposure was either that kind of black person or a black person who was totally like today with a pants sagging. You know, we had a lot of just what we might call normal folks. Because whatever our experience is, we knew a myriad. Most people did, I did. So anyway, not only were there so many brothers and sisters, they were what I call like free, if you saw my Facebook post, because they were just themselves, unabashedly, you know, proud and just out there. And that was a whole new thing for me, man. My mother was that way, but that's one person.
Right.
And you know, as the kid of your parent, at a certain point, particularly maybe 13 or 14, you may respect them and love them, but they don't really know anything anymore, right?
Well, yeah, sure.
Until you come back around and appreciate it later. So I had this notion it sounds so ridiculous now, but I'm just gonna make it simple. In the mind of the lane, I was like, I just needed more of the serious black experience, whether that meant partying hard, you know, disrespecting myself by smoking weed hard. Like, how's that black? I don't know.
Right, but in terms of interacting with people in that peer group.
Man, and probably something I did that not a lot of other black students at Penn did was I hung out a lot with people in the city of Philadelphia. I went up in the West Philly. Remember I told you that thing about gregarious loner? I never fit anywhere, but I'm comfortable everywhere.
Right.
I just roll up to West Philly or roll out to North Philly, you know, find a basketball court, play. And even some of my peers at Penn were like, man, you're not afraid of me. I'm like, afraid of what? What are we, animals? Like, you know, and so I don't know. And so I spent a lot of time, like, you know, outside of Penn's environment as well as on campus. Freshman year, I guess I'd have to describe it as a little bit of rebellion to what I was accustomed to, because, today they do gap years, right? Well,
Sure.
I don't think we ever heard of anything called the gap year. It probably would have been a good time for me to take a gap year and travel if I'd known about that option. But,
From what time? From your graduation as a senior in at boarding school to
yeah,
to your
Penn.
first year at Penn. Uh-huh.
Yeah, I think so. The pattern academically, the fall of '85, which was the fall of my senior year in high school, I was accepted to Penn, early decision. Technically, you find out in December. They told me in like September because, basketball, that connection as well.
Right.
So it's September and I've got an entire school year to go and I know where I'm going the following fall.
Right.
I applied for one school. That's it.
Now, why did you only apply to one school? Why was it?
I did the research.
Uh-huh.
I was getting a lot of heavy recruiting in sports. I was getting the Naval Academy, West Point. I was getting for football, like UCLA, Nebraska. I was getting for basketball. Believe it or not, and I'm with Penn, I got Kansas and Duke.
Right.
I was the opposite of a lot of kids. A lot of kids at that age think they're way better than they are. The truth is, I didn't think I was good enough to be recruited by Kansas, but they did recruit me. A guy named John Calipari, who was an assistant to Larry Brown, who's now the Kentucky head coach. But he really put UMass on the map. They didn't do anything after him. And at Duke, I think the assistant coach was named Bob Bender. They wanted for two guard, either Phil Henderson out of Chicago or me. Phil was deciding between Illinois and Duke. And if he went to Illinois, I could get the Duke scholarship. He went to Duke. So,
Right.
Looking at Stanford, there's a guy there by the name of Dr. Tom Davis, who was the coach who had come from Iowa. And so that's another side of my personality. If I weren't able to score touchdowns, make tackles, and dunk basketballs, you'd have thought of me as a nerd. But because of my physicality, no one ever called me a nerd. But that's really who I was. Like in high school, being the best athlete on campus, but at lunch and everything, I sat with the nerds.
Well, truth be told, I did not see you as a nerd at all. At all.
I know. At some point, my dream was to be an astronaut at some point. That's another conversation. But the guys in my dorm that I told you I lived with in high school, my dorm was considered kind of like the nerd dorm. And most people after freshman year, they sort of move around and find their way to their group. I stayed in Hillside all 4 years because I was happy there. Yep.
What's also interesting, well, let's put it this way. I mean, even with all those schools recruiting you, you only applied to Penn. So there must have been something about Penn.
Yeah, I decided early. So I don't know how many people would be interested in this or even an interview with me. But so we looked at Stanford. My mom said, "Oh, I'll never see you again if we go there." So I believed her, and I was like, "Oh yeah, California. California is not for me probably anyway. What do I know?" A lot of mid-major schools you can look at, like James Madison, William & Mary, Virginia Commonwealth, and then some of the big schools. Well, I don't want to go to any of those schools. And if you're from a certain academic pedigree, if you will, Duke, Stanford, the Ivy League. So each Ivy League school was recruiting me. Went through the list, thought that I wanted to live in a city. I'd never lived in a city. I hated Columbia's gym, right? So the idea is that you're not going to go to the school just for sports, but if any of those schools you pick are going to be fine academically. So why not think about the sports a little bit, which is ironic because I stopped playing. But Columbia's gym was like underground. I'm like, my high school gym's better than this. Like, I don't know here, but it's New York City. Boston, I like Boston. I like the idea of playing for a black coach. His name was Peter or Reggie Roby, I forgot. But my senior year in high school, he left to go be an executive, I think, at Reebok. And I think he's back in Boston now as an athletic director at Northeastern.
Right.
Penn had, what was the other city? So Boston. Brown wasn't really a city. My mom was very high on Brown, coach named Mike Singheiser. I think he was like wooing my mom and she liked it and it worked. She really wanted me to go to Brown, but they had this gym, the old gyms with the tracks above them?
Yes. So
Brown, since they have a better gym, but this is a college Division I team, even though it's Ivy League. And I'm like, again, my high school gym's nicer than this. And when you shoot the corner, you feel like you're going to hit the bottom of the track. Like, this is not an upgrade in sports.
Uh-huh.
So Penn was almost by default. It was in a big city, and they were actually good and played teams outside of the Ivy League. You know, the other Ivy League teams played each other, and then like Lehigh and Hofstra,
Right.
you know, those Colgate. Penn played the Ivy League, and then they played Notre Dame and Alabama. And you say, oh, right, a better schedule and good athletes like myself who've been recruited by bigger athletic schools. And so Penn had the horses in the league. You know, I got to practice and play with Perry Bromwell and Phil Pitts and John Stovall, and that was awesome.
That was a big deal.
And the Palestra was awesome and noisy. Yeah. Franklin Phil was cool. When they started recruiting me, they also had a black coach, a guy by the name of Greg Littlepage, but he left Penn during that time also to go be an assistant AD at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville.
Right.
He just retired as their AD maybe 2 or 3 years ago.
Right.
So Penn was almost like the default of all the things I wanted to do.
And because you were a college athlete, though, you had an entirely different track than the majority of everyone else there, right? I mean, would you say?
I did and I did not. On one hand, academically, I don't have any doubts that I'd have gotten in if I didn't play a sport. You know, certain schools are feeders to other schools. For example, Exeter sent a bunch of people to Harvard. Deerfield sent a bunch of people to Harvard and Yale. My school sent a bunch of people to like Georgetown and Brown. And, you know, in my high school senior class, I think 4 of us went to Penn. Mm-hmm. So those relationships existed. Basketball just made it even easier for me. Like, in other words, instead of finding out regular early decision, they were able to tell me in September.
Right.
And so it's that kind of different. But academically, here's a funny story. So when I got to campus, it seemed like all the black folks knew each other already. And I felt a little left out. I'm like, what is this? Like, what is this pre-freshman thing? Because they had all met in pre-freshman. I say they had all, but you know what I mean. A
lot of us, because I was in I was in the program.
And so I didn't realize until later. I thought maybe they just like my name got lost in the system and I didn't get invited. But apparently the idea was if the school felt you needed a little bit of a push and acclimation before classes started.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so academically, they didn't feel I needed that.
No.
Right?
No.
So
well, the reason why, let me tell you the reason why, and it's right off the top of my head. Mm-hmm. Because you had attended the school that you did, a private school. I mean, you even repeated one of the grades, like, because you wanted the experience, right?
Right.
Culturally, you were already there. Okay, so I remember being in pre-freshman program and thinking the university was one way, right? When September hit, right, or late August hit, I got the shit shocked out of me, right? So because there were so many people that were different than our little group, right? So that program was, I mean, they were wise to put that in place, and I still think that it is in place. And it wasn't just for the black students. It also had people that were from California.
That's right.
People that needed to have that.
I know it wasn't just blacks. I'm just saying in the black community, it seems like such a high percentage of them have been in.
Yeah, because, you know, at that time, it was needed. You know what I mean? And I even look back and I say, man, we were not prepared. I think it was culturally first, academic second. Because I think if we had gotten the culture thing right, then academically would have been okay.
Right.
Right. I mean, it's just, I was not prepared maybe as much as someone that like yourself. That being said, I think that the community at Penn, particularly the black students there, were very active. We were very active. There was a different level of, as you said, it was closer to kind of where your mom was, right? Or my parents. There was sort of a consciousness, if you will, right? So I didn't go to Philly, to North Philly, to hang out or anything like that. But I did do things that were sort of catch up, because I also grew up in the suburbs. So I didn't have the true urban experience, and I felt it was important. And I think part of what I was able to get from Penn, being in the city, was that.
Right.
Yeah. Let me ask you about what you do. Like, what is your day-to-day like? You called yourself a jack of all trades. I remember you said this during a conversation. Explain to us what that means to you or for you.
Well, outside of medicine, I never was on a track to do anything particularly for the rest of my life. Everything I've ever done, I knew there would be a season. It's difficult to hone in when you are, number one, intellectually curious about a lot of things. And number two, I say this to be candid with you, not to be self-serving, that everything you try, you're pretty good at it.
Okay, yeah, sure.
It's hard to focus. I was in this program, a part of a program called Medicine as a Career, as a younger kid, and it was run by this lady named Dr. Velma Watts, and she was a part of the Bowman Gray School of Medicine at Wake Forest University, which is now just called, I think, Wake Forest School of Medicine. And they were identifying young minority kids who had an interest in medicine, and for the most part, were going to pay for medical school if you stayed on that track. I was in that program, and you know, because what do, right? Like, if you're a young kid and you're tall, people say you should play basketball, right? You're a young kid and you're big and huge and husky, people are like, you're a football player. If you're a young kid and you're like smart, people are like, you should be a doctor. Like, whatever, you know how it goes. So, you know, those of us with certain grades and blah, 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 intellectual curiosity got in this program. Not by any, I don't remember how I got into it because I didn't apply for it. Maybe it was my mom or one of my teachers. I just knew I ended up there. And so anyway, you spend summer, you spend time, you take classes at the medical school, you do anatomy, you work on cadavers, like literally like the dead bodies, and you're in high school. And I don't remember, David, you can't quote me on this, but I don't even think the real medical students got to do that their first year.
No.
Anyway, I remember making rounds with a nephrologist, and she's a really neat lady who drove a black Porsche. And so we went to different buildings in her Porsche. And I decided that summer that I knew I didn't want to be a doctor. I could not divorce. I know you may find this hard to believe, like Mr. You know, whatever man here, but I whatever that means, I couldn't divorce myself from it emotionally. She told me, you'll get over it. And I was like, nah, I don't think I want to deal with sick people like this every day. And like go home and I think about who I saw and the problems and the kid. And,
okay.
And yeah, just it was too tough. And then for whatever reason, I had the foresight to understand schedules. And I knew that I didn't want to work. And when I say that hard, I work hard now. You know, I don't have a lazy bone in my body, I don't think. But I didn't want to be tied to something all the time. You know, the pager and the hours. And I just thought, that's not what I want for myself. I want something different. I did not know that entrepreneurship was a word.
Right.
But in my mind, that's kind of how I was thinking.
Yeah.
And so leading into Penn, Jack of all trades, I never got into the whole like chasing the Fortune 500 companies and wanting to do that kind of stuff and wear the tie and be the guy, you know, corporate guy. That never appealed to me. Not a single solitary day.
And that was big, right? Back then.
Yeah.
It was big.
But even though, so here's one of those basketball things. The summer before getting to Penn, I worked for Glaxo out of Research Triangle Park, you know, in North Carolina, who became GlaxoSmithKline, whatever, because John Haber, who was actually the father of a friend that I knew in Chapel Hill, but I never knew he went to Penn until I applied and got in. John Haber was the CEO at Glaxo, and somehow that connection happened with Penn and basketball. So I worked for Glaxo that summer. They paid me well, like to work in some IT department where I didn't know what was going on. But yeah,
it happens, right?
And later on, circle back after college. Later on, that guy, and tell me if I'm getting off course. This is authentic to who I am. Bob Ingram was the CEO of Glaxo, Burroughs Wellcome Smith, or whatever. He's the CEO. Now you got folks graduating from high school, from Ivy League schools and wherever else, and they want to go work for companies like, you know, Eli Lilly and Glaxo and whatever.
Right.
And I've got the CEO personally asking me to come work. And I turned him down because it wasn't what I wanted. Because Bob and I used to have dinner at a bar together. I didn't even know who he was. We met, we struck up a conversation. It was close to my house in Durham. I used to go to this bar called Nana's. It was like an upscale restaurant, but they served good food at the bar, and I was slowly becoming an alcoholic. I'd have my Maker's Mark and drink and eat my meal, and this guy was in there often too. And we just one day struck up a conversation, and finally one day he says, you know, I'd like you to come out and just visit, you know, for a while and have a conversation about, I'm not sure exactly where you want to go with your career, but he knew I was a portfolio manager and a trader. And so the finance route. And so I was like, sure, I'll come out. So he invited me out to his office at Glaxo. He's the CEO of Glaxo worldwide. And he says, I've identified, I'm giving you the short version. I've basically identified 3 people and you're one of them.
Okay.
You're CFO of Glaxo. You know how big that is?
Yeah, well, it's huge. Yeah, it's huge.
What's that?
It's huge.
Yeah.
It's big. It's big.
He says, but, you know, just sort of pedigree-wise, we want you to have an MBA because I hadn't gone to grad school. I'm a guy who's been a trader on Wall Street, a portfolio manager, and my degree is African-American studies.
Right, I remember that. I remember. So back up 1 second. So as Jack of all trade, you turned down this, you said, okay, no to the doctor thing. Then that led you into trade. You started trading right after graduation?
Yep, downtown Philly on the Phillies.
Okay. And how did that, real quickly, how did that come about? Did you apply? Did you know somebody?
Knew somebody.
You knew somebody. All right.
So I always knew that I was going to, I say always, not true. Remember I said I started thinking about what I want to do. I was good with numbers. I didn't really want to work that hard in college. I kind of felt like it was just a place stamp. You know, you go in, you get through, you get the degree. I was connected, you know, the high school thing, right? Even today, I use more connections from high school and business than I do from college.
That's very, very interesting that you said that.
It's true.
But I will put that, you know, as we go later on, but that's very interesting that you said that, right?
Yeah. So Brian Callen, the guy I told you became my best friend in high school, his dad, number 2 at Citibank.
Yes.
You know, there were people from Penn we worked on down Wall Street. I don't know if you know, Charles Adams worked at American Express, maybe Stan Crump, American Express. Some other people from Penn were down in Wall Street area. I was down there. I don't know how everyone else got there, but I think people did the typical put on the suit, the tie, interview, you know, that resume thing.
Yes.
Mine was connectivity. I was friends with Brian. Brian's dad was there at Citibank. I worked down here at Citibank on Wall Street for the summer. I knew where I was going. When I graduated, I was probably going to go to work for Citibank on the trading floor, risk management. But in the meantime, you know, started dating someone who ended up being my wife. She was a Penn student behind me, so I wanted to stay in Philly.
Yes.
So I started looking at Philly. Roger, who played JV basketball at Penn, was good friends with Seth, was working for Susquehanna Investment Group downtown Philly. I think Roger's your class.
And Seth is Seth
Berger and Roger
Seth
Smith.
Berger, right. That's what I figured.
Here's the short version of the interview. You know that old thing about it's not what you know, who you know. So remember I told you I've always been confident anyway. I never went to any of that stuff at Penn, like with the resumes and the companies, and because you know I kind of knew my connectivity.
You had your way.
But I decided to stay in Philly because of the relationship, and we ended up getting married. Right, she in '92, she graduated in '91. Right. But anyway, Drew Milstein, who interviewed me at Susquehanna Investment Group, he said these words, David, and this is how I was hired. Of course, you have to be qualified, right?
Well, that was a given that you were, right? I think that's.
So he said. So Roger introduced me to Drew, and Drew says after a couple of just sort of placemat questions, he goes, "Well, you're Roger's boy, you're my boy," right?
And the rest is history.
And there you go. Yeah. Yeah.
So cut back to, all right. So you're talking to Glaxo. I think it was a Glaxo Welcome at that time, right? Could have been. And now it's Glaxo.
They become Glaxo Welcome.
GSK now, right?
Yeah.
So you're talking to the CFO of this company?
CEO.
The CEO, but did he send you to the CEO? He assumed, he says, I'm going to have you work for the CFO. Is that what he said?
No, he's saying he's identifying people now that would end up being the CFO in 5 or 6 years down the road.
I see. Yeah, this
so
is
he
huge.
wants me to come to work for them, and I'll never forget this. He said, but first you've got to carry the bag. I was like,
yes, of course.
Like, be a rep in the field, learn that business out there, come back in, work in the office. Then he was going to send me around at different places and work in finance under someone else, then come back in-house.
So Kenny,
the CFO's office. And in the meantime, they were going to pay for me to go to school to get an MBA at the Fuqua School of Business at Duke.
Yeah, of course. Then you would have been solid. So you were, in other words, you were tapped.
Yes.
That's what you were. You were tapped.
Yes.
You could. I mean, this is fascinating.
I turned him down. Now, here's the funny story about turning down men like that. I told him that I was happy where I was.
Okay.
And maybe a year or two later, I decided maybe I want to follow up on that. He wouldn't take my calls.
Right, of course not.
You don't turn down, I guess you learn you don't turn down guys like that.
No. Like, the best thing you could have done was just go through it. And this is the kind of stuff. Now, I mean, I'm not telling you what to do, right? Or what you should have done. But I'm only I'm reflecting on what I didn't do. So this is a personal thing for me. Yeah. I'm thinking, well, if I were Kenny, maybe I would have just gone through and said yes to him and done a couple years there and then like finessed my way out somehow. But maybe because you said yes to him and he's the top guy, even if you had finessed yourself out later, it still would have been an issue.
Yeah.
Could have been, right?
I wasn't thinking about that. I was just thinking, I'm doing exactly what I want to be doing.
Well, yes.
And I love it, and it's fun, and so I'm good.
And as an entrepreneur now, what types of things are you in?
Primarily construction and development. Yeah. I've had trucks. You know, I own up to 20 trucks at one time. Trucks being the big 18-wheelers on the road and the trailers. Mm-hmm. But I never had a CDL. So I'll tell you what I do daily. I never had a CDL. I just sort of thinking about it, the spreadsheet, these numbers look good. I like the business, doing some talking, start buying trucks and hiring guys. But I never could drive one.
When you say CDL, explain to people.
Commercial driver's license, I'm sorry. Yeah, gives you the license to drive one of those. I always liked them growing up. In North Carolina, we call them transfer trucks. You know, that's what country boys call them, the transfer trucks.
Right.
So anyway, I had them, but I didn't know how to drive one. I always wanted to get the CDL, but I didn't have time to sort of slow down and do it because, you know, those classes take anywhere from like typically back then 5 weeks to 2 months. But anyway, last year, it's almost a year ago, a little over a year ago, last February 2019, I had time. I was like, I'd already sold my last truck, you know, been through that business, wound it up, sold the last truck. But I still always liked them and I wanted a CDL. So I went and took this class and I was able to get through it in 3 weeks and then just go buy a truck. And the idea was, it was kind of a bucket list thing. It really wasn't for business this time. So I bought it, had trouble buying a truck again as myself, because in the industry, you have to have experience to have what's called an authority. An authority is basically like a license to operate. So before I had a CDL, here's what's really interesting about the federal government. I could buy as many trucks as I wanted to and operate them. But once I personally had a CDL, they were like, no, you don't have any experience. You're too new. You're dangerous out there. You can't have an authority. Weird, right?
Yeah.
So I went to work for, I had to work under someone else's authority. The guy that I sold my last truck to was one of my former employees. And he was such a good guy, and so helpful to me, that essentially when I was shutting down, I knew he needed a way to take care of his family. So I sold him a $50,000 truck for $5,000 just as a means to say thank you and let him take care of his family. And he started his authority. So last year when I got my CDL, I called him and said, hey, Fred, I need a job to be able to buy my truck. So I ran into his authority. And I did that until just last month or so, because now I had a year under my belt and I went back to my own because I may buy more again. Now I know it better. I typically just drive 1 or 2 days a week because it's fun. Last summer, I did a bucket list thing. I wanted to drive across the country. So I took a load from, I told you, high school people connection. I have a buddy who owns a company down here too. So just from my experience, I went to North Carolina, picked up this load of stuff that had to drop some in Lafayette, Louisiana, and then continue out to California, went LA, then up to Oakland, hung out with Brian Jeffries while I was there for a minute, you know, Brian Jeffries then. And then drove back across country, mostly empty. I took a load from LA to Phoenix, and then from Phoenix all the way back to Knoxville. I had nothing on the truck because I didn't like any of the loads, any of the options. So I just paid for fuel and drove myself home. And
so is it safe to say that one of the reasons why you're doing this job, or I'm speculating, is the fact that when you're driving, you can actually think, listen to your music, right?
I love it.
And it goes back to what you were saying about being the loner, right? What is the phrase that you call it?
Gregarious loner. Because even along that trip, I stopped along the way and saw people I knew. Yeah. And they were like, meet you at a what? A truck stop? I'm like, yeah, truck stop.
Right. If you had gone the Glaxo route, you would not have had that kind of freedom.
Exactly.
You would not have had that freedom. They would have been watching you. They would have had their eye on you. I mean, I understand. I mean, it's almost as if he assumed that that's what you wanted to do because of who you knew and et cetera, et cetera. The circle of people that you knew, who you hung out with, where you went to school.
Yeah, and
it is
interesting. The firm I was working for at the time, they're called Smith Breeden Associates, and they were based out of Durham Chapel Hill really, because Doug Breeden, his name in it, Smith Breeden Associates, was this guy who, I forgot what the theory of his own theories were, but he had a couple of theories, like he's so smart, right, that he had these theories after his name. But the boutique firm, instead of being in New York, was down there because he was a tenured professor at Duke. And so he could do what he wanted to do.
Right, sure.
So he had people coming from all over the country working in Smith Breeden Associates. No one thought like this high profile, small boutique investment firm would be in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, but Doug was the fulcrum. Sure. And so coincidentally and great for me, it was in my hometown, and I wanted to get out of the North then, you know, having some marital problems. Now I'm sick of all this Philly, big city stuff, and I want to get out. And guess where there's a great firm? In my hometown.
Right.
And I don't know if this is true, but I sort of suspect it's true. I think that Doug was one of the few sponsors for me at boarding school.
Could have been.
I don't know that for sure, but I kind of suspected it. Because my mother certainly, as a nurse, couldn't afford what at the time was about $30,000 a year for high school.
Wow. I mean, it's an amazing story because what you're telling me now, I mean, I did get inklings that your growing up, your upbringing was a bit different than what I had originally thought while I was at Penn with you, right? And part of it was the project that you were working on with John Kingston, who, just so you guys know, John Kingston ran he wanted the Republican seat in Massachusetts, right? To challenge Elizabeth Warren, right? So if you can take us, because I'm going to cut directly to this, you were working as a consultant or as some sort of how do you say wingman? Is wingman? It's not
consultant's good.
Yeah, it's like you were there. You're right hand man.
Yeah,
I can say that to John Kingston. And John, just so you guys know, John and I are fraternity brothers. John, to make it very clear, John is a white man, white bread as they come. I am somebody that's on the opposite side, probably in a multitude of ways. And the fact that Kenny was going to be a consultant, I already knew that was a huge deal. I knew it was a big deal. And I think that's why I started emailing you, even before I decided to do this interview series. I had started communicating with you about what that meant and the possibilities there after. So can you give us an idea of what that was like for you, or what your vision was not just for yourself working with him, but also for him. So as a consultant, almost like who was the consultant for Trump who he was in the Navy. What's his name? I should know this guy's name. The one that was in the White House, real tough guy. I don't remember his name. I should know his name. He was there at the beginning as a consultant.
Don't know.
And I saw you in a similar role, right? As someone who was because this guy also, he was in the Navy. He was doing films in Hollywood. He was working on Wall Street.
Steve Bannon?
What? Say it again.
Steve Bannon?
No, it wasn't Steve. Yeah, it was Steve, right? He's sort of a maverick.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely, right? So he had done a number of different things and worked in a number of different industries.
Yeah.
And said, okay, I'm gonna work for Breitbart, right?
That was him. I don't know how in the world Steve Bannon can remind you of me, but
let me show you what I thought. It wasn't his politics. Okay. It was just the fact that you were so different from the person that you were about to support, mm-hmm. right? Or you were about to give advice to. Mm-hmm. And you had all of these different interests, and it wasn't as if anybody could really pin you down in any particular category. So it wasn't.
And I had been a Republican for a long time, and people didn't know that.
Well, yeah, most people don't know it. So, I mean, you can elaborate on that a little bit more, a lot more, actually. Okay. You know, I'm not going to put words in your mouth on that. I'll let you explain. But tell us what it was like. How did that come together, and what was that like for you working?
So that came together because I reached out to John. Again, connections. Do you know Jay Cherie Ellis? She's a
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
Jay Cherie was a part of a project I was working on called iknow.media, iknow.media, as a writer. And she is, and you know, I'll tell you, let me talk about her for 30 seconds because she's so amazing. As she's, and I'm not easily impressed, right? It's not about me. I'm not that important, but you know how I said I don't take myself that seriously? Never really have. I also don't take anybody else that seriously. Mm-hmm. So it's fair game. So I'm not really easily impressed. It just is what it is. And when you go to a school like the University of Pennsylvania, everyone's smart, right? So to say someone is smart is like, blah, whatever. She's brilliant, dude. She's like off the chain smart. And so the more conversations I had with Jay Cherie, I was like, we should tell our sons when they're college age to really just get to be friends with these girls a little more, not just chase them, because there's some brilliant, kind of things. So she had that impression on me. So we've talked more as an adult than ever at Penn.
Right.
So her advice to me, I value. If she's E.F. Hutton, if she says it, I'm listening.
Is that right?
Yeah. And so she said, Kenny, I've been reading some stuff. You remember John Kingston from college? I'm like, yeah, I remember John. Everybody knows John, even if you don't know John, right? White guy plays out. And she said, I've been reading some stuff that he's written, and he might be a good guy to reach out to for this project. I think what he has to say, it's a good platform, and he might be interested. So I reached out to him. That's how I reached out to John. I wanted him to maybe free flow some of his ideas as a white, conservative, Christian male who had some different ideas about race that go with what people put in that bag. Well, fast forward, as it turns out, I guess he's a better salesman than I or whatever. Instead of him working on my project, I ended up working on his project. That's how that connection happened. From Jay Cherie asking me to reach out, saying I should reach out. Yeah, and then he and I started talking.
And what was it about the project, real fast, what was it about the project that Jay Cherie saw that you connected with? Or maybe you didn't, you maybe connected on some other point or so.
Yeah. Well, I don't remember exactly, but it was around politics and race for the most part. And John would have been, just like he was as an alpha at Penn, very different in terms of if you looked at the site, I don't know if you have, in terms of who's writing, but he would have given a different perspective.
Right.
And, I'm kind of rambling because I don't remember, but the connection was there, and we made a good connection. And it was genuine, but I didn't know when I called him that I don't think I knew that he was running for Senate.
Okay.
We started talking about that, and that conversation sort of took over because I knew that where he was in his life, I didn't even continue to consider the I know conversation because I knew there was going to be no time for it.
Right.
And then he ended up throwing the idea out of me coming up and working with him. And by the way, we never quite defined it because I don't know if it's, the more I've gotten to know him better as outside of Penn and Penn, he may not be as free flowing as I am in terms of, I'm not a risk taker, like I'm just going to bet the farm, but I am willing to roll out something and see how it goes.
Sure.
John's more particular about it, and he's a planner. He's a meticulous planner, and he wants experts at every angle to,
Right.
like, how are we going to hang this picture on the wall? Let's hire a picture framing expert, right? Like, that's my impression of how he operates. And I trust the gut a lot more with experts involved, but then I tell the expert, hey, remember, you work for me. You be the expert, but this is my vision, right? With that said, he and I never pigeonholed exactly what my role would be. He liked my politics and what I had to say. I liked what he had to say from a different perspective. And the agreement was, we'll figure it out as we go.
Right.
And I'll start working on the campaign.
Right.
Our visions for that ended up being probably a little bit different, but he was also strapped in what he could do because he was a never Trumper. He left the Republican Party when Trump won the nomination because he just, you know who Donald Trump is, and John couldn't stomach Donald Trump. But he had to come back to the party to run in the Republican, as a, for Republican Senate seat. And he had a tough time because on one hand, he was trying not to offend the crazy Trumpers because he had to get through the primary to then go to the general, but still try to show people that he was different and he was not just a typical white male Christian conservative, which for better or worse is correlated with racism in this country, right? And he is not a racist. And so he had a hard time trying to walk that line, right? Like, I don't want these people to hate me, even though I'm a never Trumper. I need them to know that I stand with them on strong conservative Christian values, but that's not who I am, as a person. I am this guy who's strong on whatever you consider pretty much the Republican right political agenda for the most part, right?
Yes.
And so we thought that maybe my perspective as not being, so my having been a Republican for a long time, I am so far from people like Ward Connerly or those sort of, stereotypical, or Clarence. Public Enemy, right? Like they're my heroes, right? So like Black Pride, marry black woman, that's me. But I was a Republican for different reasons, which is it okay to flow into that now?
Yeah, you know what? This is what I'm going to do.
Okay.
We're gonna, because we're getting close to probably an hour. This is what we're going to do.
Okay.
We're going to come back in the future and lay out the whole Black Republican thing, because that in and of itself could take an hour.
Okay.
And I think it's very interesting that you revealed this in this setting in the interview, because I'm sure there are a lot of people that, and particularly people that we know, that don't necessarily know this about your background, and I think it deserves more conversation and explanation. I will tell you this, that what I had known about John is that I was on the mailing list for his project years before. So I was literally, keeping track, as I told you, I know how to do, of people and what they're up to, even if they're tangentially, within my eyesight. I'm there, watching. So when I heard that you were working with him, I knew it was a huge deal, right? And I didn't know as much about you as you've just shared with everybody and myself. And so I know that I was right about reaching out to you, calling you, letting you know about Side 100, the whole bit. It's just interesting we all know that John did not win the Republican seat. But I think there's more to come on the story, right? So part of my reason for having you on here is to, get all of that out into the open, and hopefully, not even hopefully, I think things are going to move as they are going to move, right? So the last thing I want to ask you before I close is that, where do you stand now after the campaign was over? Do you have any future projects that you have your eye on, or, to give us an idea of what's brewing for you?
You mean projects in terms of politics?
Could be politics, could be entrepreneur, it could be
Yeah.
entrepreneurial, it could be anything.
Well, I'm finding my sea legs a little more on the development side of things. I'm still I'm not going to call it all over the place, because I'm willing to invest in anything. Like, I've owned a staffing agency, different things, trucks, and done construction, consulting. Over the years, I gained this business acumen that I didn't go to grad school for, don't have an MBA, but I just do things naturally and then learn later that it had a name, right? So
Right.
I may be doing something, I hear some guys with MBAs go, oh, blah, 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 vertical integration. And I'm like, excuse me, what's that? They describe it, I'm like, oh, I've been doing that shit for years, right? Like, just to know it had a name.
Right.
So with that said, I'm finding my sea legs better, and post 50, really understanding the development business a lot more. And I will probably, this is not about money, it's about process. My net worth will probably go tenfold in the next 5 to 6 years because of where I am and how much more I know about the process and how to access certain things. And if you begin to think about that and do any research, that's probably not rare, particularly for a person who hasn't just had a job all his life. It becomes that snowball that gets bigger later, right? One layer, one iteration when the ball is bigger is more than 10 iterations when the ball is small. And so, if that analogy makes sense, that's kind of where I am. Speaking of alphas and relationships, as I decide or whether to or not put more trucks on the road, Brian Keys works for a particular corporation where he has some real influence on some of the lanes. And so Brian and I have been talking, and I'm trying to, use that connectivity and, genuine friendship, but use that connectivity to say, hey man, look,
this is a possibility.
Let's get it done. I don't want to put the cart before the horse, but if you can make these lanes happen and you need 5 trucks, you need 4 trucks, I'll buy them and I'll hire 4 guys and we'll do this lane, right? Give me that opportunity. So Brian plays a role in that because he has that ability.
Yes.
Yeah. And so it's just different things. I'm buying this week, I'm closing on a building that a funeral home rents because it's a good opportunity in Corona. People need cash. So I'm buying that funeral, not the business, but the building, that funeral home. I
understand.
It's also in a hub zone. So on the construction side for me, if they move out, I'll move my operation in and I can do government contractors as a hub zone business. Contractors as a hub zone business. My daughter's 20, but it's an opportunity. So we're going to close on her first home probably in the next week as well.
This is fantastic.
Right? So she'll be 20 years old with her first home.
Well, Kenny, look, I have plenty of questions I have as a result of the first. I hope you come back as a result of this conversation, because you dropped a lot, right? And we didn't go deep. And part of it is that these interviews, although they're much longer than people think are necessary, I think they're important, particularly for the people that I am pulling in, which are artists, writers, creators, small business people, entrepreneurs, inventors, right? These are the people that are really important to me, and you're one of these people. I sense this very much after I heard that you were involved with John and his campaign, and I hope we can do this again. The next time we can talk about your background and just the Black Republican experience, right? I mean, I'm interested in hearing your perspective on that. I think it's important for people to know that, that you are a Republican. That means for a lot of people, it's like you're the boogeyman. I don't necessarily believe it. Not even necessarily. I don't believe that's so.
For the record, I'm not active at all now because although I never bought the idea that Republican was the racist party in light of Democrat, it's crazy. But under Donald Trump, there's something else in the water. And so it's gone so far that I'm not associated today.
Yeah. I think, just from my perspective, I think there's something else going on that we don't know about. Generally, that happens in government, right? And in your leadership of countries. But I think we're hitting a level that is so far beyond what anybody can see. And it's playing itself out right now before our eyes. So this is why you see pandemic, how people are handling that, the economy, how they're handling that. What happened in 2016 with the election of Donald Trump, how that came about, that I'm going to table for another time, another discussion. And now, of course, I'll have to beef up my knowledge as well, because I know you know this very, very well. So I need to do some research and make sure that I'm covered. With that,
give me too much credit.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time. I hope this was enjoyable for you. I think it's going to open a lot of people's eyes. Oh, it's opened my eyes, and have a great rest of the weekend.
You too, man. Hey, it was fun. I love the one-on-one. It's great.
Right.
It's just a conversation.
I knew it was going to work, right? I knew it was going to.
Hey, you even told me where to sit in the house. Of course, no one.
I'm a producer. I'm a producer, right? I did this for the Charlie Rose Show, which is a story, another story that I could go into. I did this for MSNBC. So I said I could at least do this for the people I know, right? The people that I know, have ability and have something to say. So with that,
I had a nice background picked up, like real nice, and you're like, nah, move around.
No. This works out fine.
Cool.
Thanks, Kenny. Take care of yourself.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.